All right, so thanks everyone for coming. This is going to be a presentation about an update on MPArch and what we've done since the last BlinkOn. So I'm today here to deliver you this message, but the MPArch team is a large effort, particularly with my colleagues here in Waterloo. We have a large team in London as well working on this project. Igalia has also contributed a lot to MPArch, and as well as our colleagues are also working on pre-rendering and fence frames. So this is a very large effort. So thanks to the team, and I think many of them are here. So let's get started. So what is the agenda for today? We're going to talk about what is MPArch, just a quick overview for those who are not familiar or have missed the last BlinkOn presentation. What we have done since the last BlinkOn, what are the new APIs that we've landed and are available. Talk a little bit, just touch base on the features based on MPArch, pre-rendering, fence frames, portals, and what's next for MPArch. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, so if you have a feature, if you're a feature owner and you want to fix your feature to work with MPArch, what do you need to do and how you can test. So MPArch stands for multiple pages architecture, and it's the key deliverable is to be able to host multiple pages in a single WebContents. So WebContents is the browser's concept of a tab, is best represented by the WebContents. So more recently, we have been working on many projects that needs more than one page loaded in a single tab. So guest view is kind of the first one, and in that situation, we've used a multiple WebContents approach. So there were we loaded two WebContents and stitched them together as to show us just one to the user. But with MPArch, it's time to refactor this and come up with a new way. It's more streamlined and more straightforward and simpler, easier to maintain, and we're based on technical tab as well. So when BF Cache landed, and BF Cache was allowing multiple pages to be loaded in the same tab to allow for a faster back-forward operation. And we are also working on portals at the same time, which did something similar. It allows you to load a different page and then instantly navigate to it. And then we talked with the BF Cache team, and we decided, okay, this is time to converge, and we went into starting MPArch. Since then, Prerender and fence frames started along as well, and they have very similar requirements. So that's the start of it all. And if you have not seen the BlinkOn 13 presentation, I've added links there to the slides and the recording, which is the presentation I did with Carlos. So an overview of the architecture that we're using. So we have a WebContents, and now prior to MPArch, WebContents was able to hold only a single page. So now we allow the creation of page holders. In each page holder, we own a frame tree. And we have this concept of a primary page. The primary page is the page that's been displayed to the user. A second page holder could be like a BF Cache page, or it could be a there you go. It could be either a BF Cache page, or it could be a pre-rendered page. So and we have ways to switch between them. So that's basic. That's a very broad overview. And this concept of primary page in the last BlinkOn, we used to call this top level page holder. We decided to switch this terminology to primary because top level is kind of an overloaded concept in spec, top level browsing context and so on. So primary seemed like a free word here. So that's what we went for. So what happened since last BlinkOn? We've finalized the design for MPArch. So you can take a look at our design docs there. Got it approved by the Chrome security team and started working on this. We performed a very extensive audit for the entire code base, looking for potential breakage. Like which features would be broken, would there be would this lead to a security issue, and so on. So we looked for overall this pretty much all the code base, and we identified a few major places that could potentially break. Particularly is in mainframe, since now we're allowed to have multiple mainframes in WebContents. We looked at get mainframe for WebContents, from render frame host, which goes from the render frame host back to the WebContents. We also looked at WebContents observers, at WebContents user data. Sometimes you have page-specific data type of contents. They now need to be made frame or page specific. And of course, Google had already done most of this work, as well as BF Cache, which had to convert a lot of this data into page specific data. But for MPArch, you need to go one step ahead, because we also need to support live pages in our WebContents, whereas BF Cache only supporting frozen pages. So so right now, creating multiple pages in WebContents is possible. This is landed, and you can test it by using Prerendering, which is has a prototype behind a flag. You can just use -- enable features equals prerender 2. We also have continued to work on the long tail features that need to adapt to handle multiple pages in WebContents. So the feature work and MPArch. So the team has audited all the critical path I just mentioned. There were a total of 1594 audited locations, quite large effort there. The audit was focused on mobile first. We've completed the audit on desktop with the intention of launching BF Cache for desktop, which should happen in the next few milestones. But for the general MPArch for desktop, it's still a little bit in the future. Then the audit locations that I just mentioned. However, it is possible that we've missed or incorrectly labeled the feature. So you can go check out the audit. It contains all the notes there and why we think we categorize when thing is broken or not. And yeah, this is the data is all there. The new APIs that we added to the content public interface. So we have a document lifecycle API. The document lifecycle API is important because you can notify an observer of a state change. So, for instance, if you have if you're in a Prerender and you become the primary page, you get a render frame host state changed event firing, and then you can act appropriately and update your UI and so on. You can find the current lifecycle state for a render frame host through get lifecycle state. You can also during a navigation can query the primary mainframe. And mainframe here is important because we can only expose this for mainframe. So navigation handle is in primary mainframe, is if the navigation that's happening right now is happening in the primary mainframe. And the reason we cannot expose this for subframes, or we haven't yet at least, is because in a subframe navigation, the primary page can change while the subframe is navigating. This happens, for instance, if your subframe is navigating and the Prerender gets activated. For now, you're only exposing this for primary mainframe, but yeah, you can use that in order to determine whether a feature needs to be affect just the primary page or all of the pages, or the Prerender page, and so on. Navigation handler can now store user data during activation. This is important because before we had render frame host user data, which can store user data for a document, for a live document. Sorry, render document host user data. And that can usually store user data for a live document. But during navigation, before we choose the render frame host that's going to commit this page, so before we have a renderer, we might have to store some user data. And this has happened in for a few features. For example, SSL is a good example of them, because you do your connection. If you have any errors there's no document at that point. You still need to store this somewhere, and you can go there. And there are other features that require storing user data prior to the page committing. We also have new APIs to iterate over frames, render frame host for each frame host. So it also has some parameters there, whether you want to iterate over all of the pages in this including the sub pages that are owned by a frame, for instance, a fence frame, a portal, or a guest view, and so on. We also have new test APIs, Prerender test helper, which is very useful for writing tests. It's also exposed in the content public API. There are also some changes to navigation throttles. I didn't put it there. It's less likely that a feature will need to use this the new navigation throttles API, so we've only identified 2 that need it. But I think it's important to mention that navigation throttles do not run for Prerender activation. So if you have a page that is already loaded and it's just being activated, we don't run navigation throttles, but there is a mechanism now to defer your throttle to the Prerender activation. So if you need if you have very specific needs on navigation throttles, my suggestion is right now, come talk to us and we can try to help you and come up with a solution. For the features that are based on MPArch, pre-rendering is the major feature, the one that we're focusing the most right now. Right now, Prerender host. So Prerender started being implemented based on multiple web contents, and now it transitioned completely to an MPArch based implementation. Prerender host page holder right now owns a frame tree, and it can be created through a module call that comes from renderer and asks like, please create me a Prerender for this page. Prerender activation is implemented on top of the navigation API, and Prerender host activate will activate a page, and it's called for the navigation API. So if during navigation we determine that page is already there, so we can just go there and ask the Prerender host to go and activate it. Matt is going to do a talk after this one, I think on room number 3. So if you're interested in Prerender, I suggest going to that talk. And I think Matt is going to talk about the module capability control, how we're restricting the pre-rendering features, and so on. So good talk to check out after this one. But there's also fence frames. So fence frames, I mentioned, is a new feature that we started working on. And there's an explainer, public explainer on GitHub for those who are interested in participating. It's in early stages still, but we started landing code. So right now, it is possible to create a fence frame in the render process, but it doesn't do much yet. So this is still work in progress. And the idea with fence frames is that it provides a top-level browsing context that provides no access to the parent's frame tree. So this is the reason why fence frames and MPArch were so good together, because we already have these restrictions for portals. Since portals are also modeled as a top-level browsing context, so it makes sense for fence frames to start working with us. And fence frames wants to provide no communication between the fence frame and its embedder, so no access to the proxy, as well as no access to storage and so on. So that's the whole goal, is to provide like this fence frame, the idea that's a privacy and security type of restrictions. This intention prototype was sent a week or 2 ago to the mailing list, to the BlinkDev mailing list, and patches started to land. And Dom is going to do, and Shivani are going to do a talk about fence frames. Unfortunately, it's going to be at the same time as the pre-rendering one, so you're going to have to choose one of the 2 to attend, but I think they're all recorded, and you can look at them afterwards. So what are the next steps for MPArch? So we're going to continue to work on the long tail of features. So basically the features that we identified that needs to be fixed on the audit that we've done. We're going to prepare for the pre-render experiment. So the idea is that once we are feature complete for pre-render, we can do an experiment origin trial or some kind of experiment. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to look at, but the idea is that we want to have some trial of pre-render. We are going to finalize the design for fence frames and then start planning the transition of portals towards MPArch. So the idea here is that pre-render builds on these features of instant activation and loading simultaneously a second page in our contents. Fence frames will have this idea of embedding a page inside another, a top-level browsing context inside another, and then portals basically takes up everything and builds on top of that to provide both like the instant activation together with the embedding. So what does this mean for you? So if you're a feature author, what do you need to do? So you can, one of the things that you can do to verify your feature works with Prerender, you can test pre-rendering by using --enable features equals Prerender2. It's available right now on Canary. Prerender can be initiated right now with link rel equals Prerender. But keep in mind, I've been hit by this once, is that Prerendering only works right now for same origin Prerender for multiple reasons. But so make sure that whatever you're trying is the same origin as the parent page. Content test Prerender test helper is available and can be used to write browser tests that uses Prerender. And if you found that your feature does not work with Prerendering, please file a bug and assign the MPArch and the Prerender components, and we can help you take a look. To fix the feature, we wrote some guidelines that cover the majority of the cases. I want to just point to the major ones that we've seen is the feature needs to be restricted to the primary frame only. So this happens particularly, for instance, with the UI related features. So if you're displaying some kind of UI, you probably only want to do that when the page is visible to the user. Sometimes the page is incorrectly targeted when responding to an event. We've plugged a lot of the pages, the render frame hosts through WebContents observers, so that, for instance, a document loaded on mainframe now receives a render frame host, so you know from which page this document got loaded, and you can respond appropriately. But there were, it's kind of a common thing that we had to fix, where state is reset when a page finishes navigation, but now, well, which page is finished navigation. So this is one of the things to keep a look for. And then sometimes we have per WebContents user data that needs to be converted per page user data. BFCache has already done a lot of this because when a page navigates, we need to keep the previous user data, and then you know, when you restore from BFCache, you have to restore that user data. But for things that were, there's still some things that we had to fix here in this category. So I think that's all that I had for my talk. We still have about just over 5 minutes. So I just want to open for questions. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand or write it in the questions, the Q&A feature of Meet.
Are we going to maintain this silence for 10 more minutes?
All right, looks like everyone understood everything perfectly. All right, I'm still going to be here, or you can also find me on the Slack channel. I also want to mention that we do have an MPArch Slack channel, so if you're interested in helping us, you can go there and join the MPArch channel.